I'd first like to start out by saying that I'm Taina McField, and I'll be your moderator for today's conversation, and want to welcome everyone and say thank you to the administration who are on the line. Thank you to all the teachers, students of all ages, and also the parents who gathered today to have this important conversation with us. A little bit about who I am and why I'm here. My name is Taina McField, like I said, and I'll be your moderator this evening for the community forum. I'm also the mother of a bright, energetic, enthusiastic, mischievous, and insightful 11-year-old. And I used to be a parent at MSC for the past 4 years. And so I'm joining you today to bring you some conversation from dynamic men in the community and to talk about how we navigate this current moment. And specifically, we want to say tonight that we are centering the voice of Black men in the community, but it is not exclusive. We want to invite everyone to lean into the conversation and to go along the journey with us. I know we might all be a little tired of Zoom by this point, if you're like me, but we invite you to feel free to turn your camera off for this first part, and also want to let you know that the first portion of this conversation will be recorded. But once we get into the breakout groups, we really want to build community. So as much as possible, I know we are all like in our COVID wear, but we invite you to turn on your camera so that we can build community as much as possible together. And with that, we'll jump right in. And we're recording. So just a little context for today's conversation. While this moment may be a glimpse in time, talking about police accountability, police brutality, racial justice, racial injustice, we wanted to just start out by acknowledging that this is a culmination of events of institutional racism, systemic failures, implicit bias, and inadequate structures of accountability. And so today we'll take a moment for you to hear firsthand accounts from men of color who are your neighbors, your fellow parents, and also allies in the commitment to make MSC a brave and safe community for all. And so I'm going to introduce who the panelists will be a little later, and as they speak, so that we get to know each other a little bit better, I'm going to ask them to say their names when they start and just the grade that their children are in, because this moment won't last forever and we'll be back in school together. And you should just say hi to the people that you see and know a little bit about who they are and who's in your community. So right now, I'm going to ask us to go to the video. We want to start out with the video.
Okay, so we're going to show about 5 minutes of the clip of Killer Mike's speech, and afterwards I'll share the transcript in the chat for the full thing if you want to refer to it during the breakout room. But here we go.
I didn't want to come, and I don't want to be here. I'm the son of an Atlanta City police officer. My cousin is an Atlanta City police officer, and my other cousin, East Point police officer. And I got a lot of love and respect for police officers, down to the original 8 police officers in Atlanta that even after becoming police had to dress in a YMCA because white officers didn't want to get dressed with niggers. And here we are 80 years later. I watched a white officer assassinate a Black man, and I know that tore your heart out. And I know it's crippling. And I have nothing positive to say in this moment because I don't want to be here. But I'm responsible to be here because it wasn't just Dr. King and people dressed nicely who marched and protested to progress this city and so many other cities. It was people like my grandmother, people like my aunts and uncles who were members of SCLC and NAACP, and in particular, Reverend James Orange, Mrs. Alice Johnson, and Reverend Love, who we just lost last year. So I'm duty bound to be here to simply say that it is your duty not to burn your own house down for anger with the enemy. It is your duty to fortify your own house so that you may be a house of refuge in times of organization. And now is the time to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize. It is time to beat up prosecutors you don't like at the voting booth. It is time to hold mayoral offices accountable, chiefs and deputy chiefs. Atlanta is not perfect, but we're a lot better than we ever were, and we're a lot better than cities are. I'm mad as hell. I woke up wanting to see the world burn down yesterday because I'm tired of seeing Black men die. He casually put his knee on a human being's neck for 9 minutes as he died like a zebra in the clutch of a lion's jaw. And we watch it like murder porn over and over again. So that's why children are burning to the ground. They don't know what else to do. And it is the responsibility of us to make this better. Right now, we don't want to see one officer charged. We want to see 4 officers prosecuted and sentenced. We don't want to see targets burning. We want to see the system that sets up for systemic racism burnt to the ground. And as I sit here in Georgia, home of Stevens, Georgia, former vice president of the Confederacy, white man said that law, fundamental law stated that whites were naturally the superior race, and the Confederacy was built on a cornerstone. It's called a cornerstone speech. Look it up. The cornerstone speech that blacks would always be subordinate. That officer believed that speech because he killed that man like an animal. In this city, officers have done horrendous things and they have been prosecuted. This city's cut different. In this city, you can find over 50 restaurants owned by Black women. I didn't say minority, and I didn't say women of color. So after you burn down your own home, what do you have left but char and ash? CNN? Ted did a great thing. I love CNN, I love Cartoon Network, but I'd like to say to CNN right now, karma's a mother. Stop feeding fear and anger every day. Stop making people feel so fearful. Give them hope. I'm glad they only took down a sign and defaced a building and they're not killing human beings like that policeman did. I'm glad that they only destroyed some brick and mortar and they didn't rip a father from a son. They didn't rip a son from a mother like the policeman did. When a man yells for his mother in duress and pain and she's dead, he is essentially yelling, please God, don't let it happen to me. And we watch that. So my question for us on the other side of this camera is, after it burns, will we be left with charred, or will we rise like a phoenix out of the ashes that Atlanta has always done? Will we use this as a moment to say that we will not do what other cities have done, and in fact, we will get better than we've been? We got good enough to destroy cash funds.
So, in addition to being moderator, I've also been asked just to share. And so in this moment of vulnerability, just watching Killer Mike, for those of you who are not aware, Killer Mike is an African-American hip hop artist. He's also a political activist, and he has been very outspoken about ways to shift the system and shift institutions that have been culpable in implicit bias and racist practices that disproportionately disserve African-American communities and people of color communities. And I'm shaking a little bit right now because every time I see that video and I watched it with my son, who's 11 years old, I feel fearful. And at one point in time, I could turn off the TV and I could process my fear alone because he was young enough and I didn't have to explain it to him. And the other day, the name George Floyd passed across the television and he said to me, "Mom, who's that?" And I asked him to turn off the television, but he's 11 and I can't hide what's happening in the world from him. So he went in his room, he took out his smartphone and he Googled him. And there the conversation about saying the name of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others began. And I will admit I was not prepared. And I am not prepared. But today we are asking you to step into a brave space with us, whether we feel prepared or not, to have the important conversations that we need to have about the state of our country, the state of our school, and the state of our community. And so before we move on, that was heavy and deep. I just want to ask everyone to put your feet firmly on the floor, straighten your spine, and we're going to take 2 collective breaths together as a community on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. We're going to inhale, let it out. We're going to inhale and let it out. And with that, I'm going to introduce our first panelist and ask Rahsaan to come to the mic and speak with you a little bit about his experience as a Black man navigating this world.
Taina, thank you so much, and thank you to everyone. I'm coming to you as a father of Avery, who's right over my shoulder here in the car. I'm coming to you as a first-year participant in the Manhattan School for Children family. We have Lynn as a kindergarten teacher, and literally the love and the openness and just the caring and kindness that we've learned this year. It's just been amazing. When I think of Killer Mike and what he said, what strikes me is the sense of history that he has. He really knew where he came from, and he knows the legacy that the Black men and the Black women that came before him, where they came from, and that was a source of pride. So, you know, as Avery is behind me and wants my attention as a dad, I want to come to you and let you know that understanding that Black is beautiful and that Black is something that you can have pride in, and that Blackness is something that can be celebrated, is something that we really hope that can be shared across the community. That Blackness, at a very young age, I learned that it didn't have to be something that was a deficit or something that was negative. And as Killer Mike said, you know, we're not talking about people of color businesses or minority businesses, just being able to say Black and sitting with that and feeling pride and not thinking that Blackness meant that you were ugly or that you were less than or that you were dumb or that you were a criminal. That Blackness was something that's a source of pride, and that your Blackness entering into a circle with other people is not something that you should be ashamed of. That you can step into your Blackness and share it with others and have other people experience it and incorporate who you are as an individual with who they are as an individual, and the different perspectives can bring you different understanding. I think one of the worst mistakes people make is trying to stay away from who they are, their authentic self, and trying to hide it being colorblind and making sure that, oh, everyone's just the same and there's no difference and I don't see difference. But when you don't see difference, you kind of wallpaper over, or you pass over the beauty in which you can learn in seeing someone for who they are. And in this whole experience, I recognize that not being able to see people for who they are and letting stereotypes and just larger narratives that people have been kind of fooled into believing take over, and not really being able to access a real memory or real familiarity with people of color has led us to this point. And I want to make sure that as a community that people feel comfortable talking about Blackness, talking about difference in that way, and embracing it, and not feeling that that's something that people should be ashamed of, but lean into it. And where you have questions, be able to engage folks. And being a Black man and being a Black father of a daughter that is very, very demanding is something I'm really proud of. You know, and the images of a Black man is not necessarily one of a man that's struggling to keep his kindergarten daughter off his shoulder and wearing necklaces and playing dress up in tea parties with her, but Black men are all those things. And I think if we engage us as we are full people, then we can also start seeing our humanity and start advocating for each other in ways that we never have before. And I think all of the names, the Eric Garners and the Abdul Muimas and the folks that have been slain by police officers are because we haven't humanized the Black men that are amongst us, and it's recognizing that we have something to offer and that you should be proud of us too.
Thank you, Rahsaan. When I found out I was having a child, I was elated. And when I found out I was having a boy, I'll admit, don't tell Aiden, I was a little bit worried because I knew from my own experiences in life that for a long while they are cute and people praise them and their activities can be seen as the activities of children. And then at some other point, because my partner, his father, is 6'5" and I'm 5'7", he will grow to be bigger and stronger and scary to some. And I can't protect him from how people see him and how they will interact with him. And so one thing that I've grappled with as a parent is whether to let my son be free, because if you know him, he is a free spirit, or whether or not to actually raise him to be compliant. And in an ideal world, those two things are not mutually exclusive. But for raising a Black boy, it is a measure of survival. How free can you actually be? And with that, I want to turn it over to our next speaker, Shawn. You're muted, Shawn.
Technical glitch. My name again is Shawn, parent of MSc. I have two kids at MSc, both are in 4th grade. So it's been 4 years now at MSc community. I think, you know, watching the video, hearing Killer Mike, you know, hearing Taina's, you know, story, and also hearing the comments from Rahsaan sort of ring true. You know, I mean, I can speak to my own personal experience as a Black man and just growing up, you know, both in terms of a Black man in the U.S. You know, I'm an immigrant, so I came from the islands, and so there's distinction in terms of like the experience is different from both ends. But when my wife gave birth, you know, to twins, a boy and a girl, to Taina's point, there's this realization that, you know, there was always this sort of fear that I don't, you know, acknowledge, that I know at some point that he's going to get bigger, he's going to grow up. And, you know, I've had this conversation with my son that, you know, within these 4 walls, within our home, you know, I can manage. I'm the one, we are the one, my wife and I are the ones sort of, managing what's going to happen, right? But once he leaves that door, once he's on his own, what will happen? And every day, I have to think about it. Every day I think about, what do I share with him? How do I help him navigate the world? But at the same time, I don't want to limit him. And I think there's a level of responsibility that we have as adults. I think Killer Mike talked about it. We are duty bound as adults, as members of a larger community. We're duty bound to make sure that we celebrate our Black boys and girls. We celebrate them. We encourage them to be adventurous. We encourage them to be, to challenge. I mean, one of the things I've always had a fear for is that, my son would go into a classroom and, he's been very outspoken, and that would be looked as a negative thing. That the fact that he's challenging someone's thought process or challenging an idea, that would be a negative thing, and that will always follow him for the rest of his life. And I think, I want to continue to, I think it's important that we continue to encourage our young boys and young Black girls to question and ask and not be afraid to do that. Because once we don't do that, to Taina's point, we have a compliant population, and we don't want to see that happen. At the same time, we know that there's a fear factor when they go out in the community, and that they come in contact with authority figures. They are, they're challenged. They're assumed to be a threat, and that's, I think, something we have to sort of hold on to. We have to a combination of allowing our young Black males, young Black boys, and young Black girls to be able to have that emotion. We talk about put a name to it, acknowledge it, own it, know what it is, so that they can be empowered. But at the same time, that shouldn't define who they are. And I think the only way we can have that happen is allowing for our community of adults to be able to acknowledge that and celebrate that and sort of encourage them to be that way. Because too often, this sort of compliance, this sort of, negative image of Black men really starts at a very young age. It starts from kindergarten, it starts from, all the way to first grade, all the way as they get to high school. All those images are being ingrained into them. As a male coming from the islands and coming to the U.S., I had to have those experiences. I have those scars. What's fortunate about I had enough support to be able to, lack of a phrase, overcome them or mask them in a way, but they're still there. When I watched the video of Killer Mike, when I watched the video of George Floyd sitting there or lying there, and this man has his knee and he cries out, it really hurts, because I can imagine myself sitting there and looking out and know that I can't do anything. I can imagine my son sitting there and crying for his mother. It hurts. And we have to acknowledge that we have to allow for our men to cry and own the emotion, because our Black boys are forced to hold it down. And because they're forced to hold it down, when they do go outside and they're not empowered and they're not told it's okay to be angry, then they either act out, and that's perceived as them being disrespectful. And that's not the case. Is that they're never given the chance to, at 4, at 5, don't cry, be a man. How dare you? We have to celebrate them. We have to allow them to own their emotions and acknowledge it, so that they won't be a victim, and they are an active part of our society. So I'll end there.
Thank you, Shawn. I think the flip side to the conversation about being free and versus compliance is that we've experienced in real life that the playing field is not even. The rules are not applied evenly. And a lot of times, even within the MSC community, we've had conversations about disproportionate feelings of disproportionate punishment towards students of color. And so we also need to acknowledge that that is real, and that is an experience for some. And while that is a reality, there's also a bright side, because it's not all bad. And so I want to turn the floor over to Jameel, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Black joy.
Hi, everybody. So I wrote something so that I would stay on track and not just ramble on, okay? So here goes. Joy. There have been so many days that I struggle to find joy, peace, and the good. Today, I tried really hard. This was especially hard since today we memorialized George Floyd. Listening to the service, there were many times I had to hold back tears. Tears of sadness, concern, worry, and distress. As I was reflecting on joy, I thought of another J word, and that is journey. My journey has led me to my joy. I'm employed as a teacher and married with children. We are blessed. We don't have to worry about where our meals come from. We're able to live and earn an honest means. For that, I am grateful. But by the same token, I am George Floyd. Any Black or brown boy or girl, man or woman could have been George Floyd. This is heavy. Over the past few days, I've experienced a range of emotions. Sometimes I'm angry, sad, confused, and betrayed by a country that we pledge to, sing about, and live in. As a Black man born in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, raised by my mom who was a principal, and by my stepdad who made tires at a B.F. Goodrich factory. At a young age, I was taught to speak a certain way. As a big Black boy, now man, I was taught to carry myself in a certain way so that people wouldn't be threatened by me. That's not fair. I was basically told I couldn't express my emotions for fear of being a victim of white supremacy. I was in college when they were protesting for Martin Lee Anderson. That was in 2006. For us to now be at a place where real change is being discussed, and it's more than a dwindling thought, gives me joy. To see Black people, young and old, coming together, letting their voices be heard, that gives me joy. To see the overwhelming amount of support from people of diverse backgrounds, particularly people who identify as white, this gives me joy. Finally, to be here with you tonight, families, students, teachers, having this conversation at a school that is overwhelmingly white gives me great joy, and this personally means a lot to me. I too thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jameel. For the first part of our conversation, we centered the voices of Black men and the experiences of Black men. But we know that we are not alone, and we are all in this together, and we have allies. And so I want to invite Jason into the conversation just to share his experience of being a leader within the MSC community, leading with bravery and knowing that it's okay. And sometimes we don't say the right things. We don't always get it right. But how do we lead with love? And so I'll turn that over to Jason.
Thank you so much, Taina and Rahsaan and Jameel and Shawn, for everything that you've said. It is, to put it mildly, an honor to bear witness to the pain and the worry and the fear and the hope that each one of you have expressed in your words. So I'd like to speak to my white brothers and sisters here, because in my experience and being part of helping to, the best I can, mold and shape the life in the community at MSC, we have so many people who have such a desire to do right, to do justice, to do mercy. And there's a couple of thoughts that I've been thinking all day about what I could say, and a couple of ideas that came to me, and I too wrote things down so I don't ramble. I encourage my white brothers and sisters to remain in your disequilibrium, to sit in your discomfort. It is so important that we don't look for the escape hatch. it is not a feeling that should go away quickly. It's a feeling that should keep you up at night. It's a feeling of disorientation. And it's only when we can be rooted in a disoriented space that we begin to question our surroundings. Were we ever really standing on firm ground to begin with? I've been doing a lot of my own personal soul searching. As many of you know, I'm a pastor at a church. I work with teenagers and young people, and I've been meeting with them all week long. And so we talked about how we formed our racial identities, and I never, ever, ever referred to this or thought about this, but as a Gen X person, we like to kind of think of ourselves Gen Xers as being much, more with it. But all of a sudden we find ourselves being 45 or older, saying, what in the world has happened? And you know what, my racial forming, or my forming of identity, even though I went to church my whole life, did mission trips, the whole works, was Boys in the Hood, NWA, and the backlash, particularly the religious backlash to those artists, New Jack City, the gang wars of the 90s, and the tough on crime. And that is where that's where my fund of knowledge grew. And I have to come to terms with how that has made me see politics, how that has made me see policing, how that has informed my knee-jerk reaction. And so, whereas I might have grown up saying the police will come here to restore order, that is not being an ally when we have experiences in which, police aren't viewed as allies for our Black and brown brothers and sisters. We have to rethink. We have to, in our disequilibrium, reimagine how we can move with justice and mercy and grace in the world. Another way we can do that is we decenter ourselves. So the answers to your questions about race do not lie in your friends who are Black and brown. They lie in the listening when they choose to share, and in you searching for things to read, other white brothers and sisters to talk to, and videos for you to watch. It is your role to educate. It is not our place. Oftentimes I find that when things happen, and it's my knee-jerk reaction, I'm talking about me personally, is I want to find, the leaders in our church who are African Americans, and I say, what can I do? What should I do? Direct me, teach me, guide me. I'm also kind of saying, help me feel better. Help me feel better. When the true work is that I should feel uncomfortable. And I should get on the phone and call my father or my friend who is white and say, hey, so what books are you reading about race? Most likely, my friend who's white might say, what do you mean? I go, the stuff in the news and everything, like, what books have you gotten? I mean, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, so that's by James Cone, he's a theologian, that's sold out till June 26th. So you have any other resources for me? Actually, no, I haven't thought about it. That's where we can do that work. Finally, we have to teach our children. And I so appreciate, Taina, you're talking about your son and that you had to have the conversation. And to my white brothers and sisters, we have to have the conversation early. And we have to bring our children into the ugly history, not in a scary way, but in a truthful way, into the ugly history. That's the only way that things are going to be different. And then finally, we need to donate time, talent, treasure. And I've seen that repeated in MSC over and over again. Time, talent, treasure. And so, and we have to be willing to make mistakes. Even right now, as I say, my white brothers and sisters, I feel like I probably shouldn't have said that, because that carries with it this whole like structure of white supremacy and like white exceptionalism. But I'm trying to speak to the white people in my community. So that might not have even been the right thing to say, but we have to risk saying the wrong thing so the next time we might be able to say something that's helpful. So that's my word. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jason. And we know, we heard from the men in our community today, but being a former parent at MSC and sitting in the auditorium and in the cafeteria, a lot of these conversations are carried by the women. So we centered male voices today to give them an opportunity to bring their experience to the forefront, but that was not at the exclusion and the acknowledgement of all of the people who carry these conversations, who walk in this light every single day. And so now we want to take a moment to transition into a place where we can have more intimate conversations, right? Because it's good to be able to hear firsthand accounts. It's even better to get to know people. It's even better to smile and say hello, the little things when you pass people every day, when we get back outside without the mask. I can't see the smile right now. And so this is the part of the conversation that we may mess up a little bit before we get it right, because we have 100 participants in the room, and we're going to attempt in a seamless way to put everyone in a breakout room with a facilitator. If we fall a little short, have patience, stay with us, and have a little grace. And we look forward to welcoming you back after the conversation in your small groups. To the facilitators, there are ground rules for the conversation, so we just want to make sure we lay those out first. Be respectful, honor emotions, language is important. You can disagree with an issue, but not someone's experience, and call each other in and not out. And with that, I turn it over to the wizards who are gonna get us into the breakout rooms.
So a quick note, we do have 7 breakout rooms set up. There are some 15 or 20 of you who haven't been put in a room yet. So facilitators, once your room starts, please give it a minute or so, because there'll be some late additions.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we're still waiting for a few people. If you didn't hear this in your breakout room, and I, as the facilitator, think I forgot to say it, we are gonna ask one person from each group just to share out something that you're taking away from your small group conversation. And if others wanna chime in, we encourage you to just write it in the chat. But we're gonna ask one person from each group to share out in a few minutes. The numbers are rising. So in a minute or so, we're gonna, and how am I gonna select? You know, this is where I gotta take my glasses off. I'm getting old. If you would like to be the representative from your group to speak and share a little bit, 1 minute or less from your group, there is a reactions button in the lower tab of your Zoom room. Put your thumb up and I will call on you, but scan the room to see if someone else from your group has a thumb up, so we only hear from one person from each group. And because I see this name first, I think it's Sigal? Sigal? We'll start with you once we commence. Can the moderator of the tech guru let me know, are all the rooms back?
All the rooms are back. Yes, if anyone, if anyone's not here, they
dropped off. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure no one is being left out of the next phase of the conversation. So before we get to the report outs, I just want to thank everyone for leaning in. I wasn't in everyone's conversation, but I know there were some hard questions asked. There were some uncomfortable moments, and everyone spoke their truth. So I just want to thank you for being brave in this community together. And so we're going to go, Sejal, starting with you. Sejal, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so in our group, we kind of started with just talking about like being an upstander and how we could use that to have this conversation with, particularly at that time, it was just the kids. But we kind of moved also to talking about how we're dealing with this at MSC as a school, because we've known in previous years that there has been some punishment, just unfair punishment for Black boys particularly. And our conversation moved also to talking about how do we talk about race and kind of like this, what happened with George Floyd with our students and with parents like who have kids like at home, like how do you have this conversation? And some parents shared that, like, you know, it's not just one conversation, it's like many little conversations, and finding the right opportunity to have these conversations at home. And some parents also shared that it's okay to not always have the answer, and like to show also that you don't always know what the right answer is, but creating these or having these conversations is important. We also heard about somebody's experience with having the talk. Like as a Black man, he was sharing just about when his family had the talk with him about, you know, what do you do when a police officer talks to you? And that experience that he shared with us was like very moving to hear it. And, you know, that there are these dialogues that we should be having to make all races aware of what Black friends and brothers and sisters have experienced. And, you know, we need to think about those conversations. Yeah, that was basically it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there another thumb up? I'm trying to scroll through as quickly as possible. If I missed you, go ahead and just shout out from another group. We don't have to get to every group, but want to hear from at least 3. Any other conversations? Anybody want to share something that stood out for them?
I mean, I can quickly report off from our group, Taina. I mean, we touched on a range of things. We sort of talked about, you know, what brought folks to the room, and some things sort of came, I think, was very fascinating. You know, the idea that sort of, you know, just being unprepared, sort of stood out. You know, being unprepared. How do we become prepared to have this conversation with our kids, Black boys and others, right? How do you have that conversation? And, you know, wanting to making sure that this doesn't become an isolated conversation, and that it doesn't become a, you know, quote unquote, a IDC conversation, that it is a school-wide discussion, and it's important that as a school, we address this issue going forward. I think we've talked a lot also about this idea of sort of making sure that as a school, we may want to revisit this idea of sort of a colorblind policy, right? We don't celebrate the culture of our student body, you know, both Black and ethnic, and just making sure that we celebrate that. We celebrate in terms of the things we do, the families that come in, the dress, all those things that we don't sort of, I think as a school, we've tried to play the safe role, right? We don't see color. And so we don't want to acknowledge the uniqueness behind all of the community. And I think just talking about making sure that there's more adults of color in our institution, even in teachers, and making sure that I think our students see that was some of the discussions that came up. And I think making sure that literature is available, literature so that our youth can access it, literature for the families. Again, that reflects the diverse community that we have. So those are the highlights that came out of the conversation from our smaller group. And if anyone else wants to sort of
Thanks, Shawn.
chime in again.
Can I get one more group?
Rahsaan, I just want to jump in real quickly and just co-sign the whole not being colorblind, not being difference blind came up in our group too. And one of the thoughts about resources of having more role models of color Roads to Success is one of those avenues to do that, and just finding other ways to introduce that would be fantastic to think about as a school community.
Great. Thank you so much, Rahsaan. So we want to, yeah.
Hi, it's Vati. I was in Rashad group also. Hi. Our group was actually fortunate enough to have 2 former students in our group who are high school students, and I think having them really helped enlighten us about their experience as white kids in MSC, and now going into a high school where they felt knowledge about race and diversity and why the system is the way it is was not something that they were given early enough, and now they are experiencing it at the high school level, and that it would have been beneficial if there was some kind of insight about it. And I think also like the knowledge of our children are the best tool to tell us about what's going on and what they need to be, what we need as adults to learn and get us out of our discomfort. And having these type of conversations, we should listen to our kids and thinking about the kids. And I think the last thing that came to that I wanted to share was I think it's very important to make sure that this conversation is understood from the place of not shaming people, because it's not about shaming. There is a lot of safe space and people that are being engaged in this conversation need to be received with love and with the knowledge that there is going to be a lot of mistakes that are going to be made along the way. And as long as we understand that we are in this really for the long haul to make a real transformational change and not simple band-aid solutions to issues that are rising up at every level, and understanding that we are in a system that is very white-centered, male perspective society in every level, not just race, but at every level. And being comfortable to have that conversation is a good space to start. But just making sure that this is a real in-depth transformation, like really radical change, and not just another lip service, let's put one more project and one more book in the classroom. That's not gonna solve the problem.
Thank you so much, Fatia.
Thank you.
So thank you to everyone. We want to respect your time. We know that we said this would end at 7:30. Hang in with me for 2 more minutes, if that. Someone in my group asked about an IDC meeting that's happening tomorrow morning, and I believe that information was placed in the chat. That is one space to continue the conversation. But as someone already mentioned, it should not be relegated to a conversation in the IDC space. This is a community-wide conversation, and we encourage everyone on this call, reach out to 5 people who were not on this call, ask them to lean in together to continue to talk about these things and to move towards action, accountability in staffing, curriculum, community culture, change in. We thank everyone who spoke today. We thank Claire and the administration for allowing this conversation to come to be and bringing it to the community. And we ask that it doesn't stop here. There were a lot of requests for support. Where do people go to get information? Where do people go to find support on how to talk to their children about these things? What are some resources and books that you can share? And so I just suggested if you wanted to send those as a first pass to the IDC email address, and then the community can figure out how to disseminate it, but it should become a front of the fold conversation and not an IDC tab conversation. And with that, I wish everyone grace and safety and health. And thank you so much to this beloved community for having me come back to facilitate this conversation. I love all of you, even the ones I've never met, and I wish everyone a good night. Brigit, I'm gonna turn it over to you for the last word.
Thank you. Oh, there's no one who can follow you, Taina. I think from all of us. I can tell from each smile how much we appreciate you and love you and stand with you on your shoulders. Thank you everyone for participating, for those who spoke, for those who didn't, and those who listened. And I wish you all a safe and good evening. I will put in the chat also the email that Taina mentioned you can send your resources to, and we'll help compile. The IDC is meeting tomorrow, but we also will meet again before the end of the year, and the school will help blast that out. As always, the IDC is a place for everyone. You were a part of it before you even knew it, so we hope you'll stay. And just want to thank again to Taina and to the panelists, Rahsaan, Shawn, Jameel, Jason. You were our hearts in this, so thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
The MSC,
Thank you.
the IDC email address is in the chat.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Brigit, do you want to call offline? How do you want to do this?
Thank you. You want to just stay on?
Yeah, let's just stay. If those can stay on, who are the presenters stay. Okay.
Shy, I see you, Shy.
Oh, no.
Brigit, did you need me to stay?
If you'd like to, would love it.